Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, From Siloed to Unified, DSPM's Transformative Role in Data Security. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send your questions in at any time during the session. If we have time at the end of the presentation, we will address your questions. Otherwise, we will reach out to you after the session to do so. A copy of the Omdia research report that we are covering today is available to download from the control panel at any time. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view the recording. I would now like to introduce today's presenters, Adam Strange, Principal Analyst, Omdia, and Ravi, Ithal, Co-founder and CTO for Normalyze. Gentlemen, over to you.
Great, thanks very much indeed, Stacey, and it's a pleasure to be joining you and the Normalyze team on this webinar today. We've got a session really to talk about sort of DSPM. I'm going to kind of set out the landscape, and then we'll obviously be hearing from Ravi later on in terms of the Normalyze piece. So let's jump right in. We've got a lot to cover off, and about 45 minutes, hopefully, to cover it through. So I am Adam Strange, as Stacey mentioned in the intro. I look after all of the data security research at Omdia. Omdia is part of a much wider group, Informa Tech, so hopefully those names will be familiar to you. Let's look at DSPM and more specifically how DSPM has emerged over the past sort of 18 months or so. It's had a fairly meteoric rise, I think it's fair to say, and is certainly setting new benchmarks around security in the data security space. So very important really to understand where it's all going and the sort of direction of travel. But first, let's have a look at some background, really, because DSPM fits in as part of a kind of a much wider kind of environment around data security as a whole. And really, I think over the past sort of 2 years, certainly last year, Omdia saw data security emerging as a distinct cybersecurity discipline in its own right. What do I mean by that? Well, I guess up until sort of a few years back, cybersecurity was a sort of a big kind of amorphous blob of security tools, all kind of trying to operate in a way which preserved the integrity of the network. So it was very much sort of outwardly looking and kind of keeping the malicious actors at bay. That was the basic principle of it. But I think what we've seen over the past few years is obviously the malicious actors out there, the hackers, able to get through those sort of outer wall defenses, breach the castle wall, if you like, and obviously have fairly free reign throughout the network as a whole. So then there is a need really to very much better protect the various elements of the network, and we'll see what those look like later on in the presentation. But looking really from a point of view of the data, I mean, obviously the data is really what the malicious actors are interested in. So it makes a lot of sense to sort of extract that from the cybersecurity soup, if you like, and really sort of focus down on it as a cybersecurity discipline. And this is really what we've been seeing. It now has dedicated roles allocated to it, data protection officer, for example, but more specifically, there's budget. And if we look over on the left-hand side of this particular screen, we can see how strongly data security now rates alongside the other more kind of established pieces of the cyber security discussion. So not surprisingly, overall security budget is at the highest, but only a few percentage points behind. Obviously, network security, but there is data security at 74%. Of those surveyed in Omdia's recent decision maker survey, saying that they expect increasing budgets for data security over the next 12 months. So really, data security putting down a marker in terms of being one of those areas that is going to need that focus. And we shift across to the right-hand side of this particular slide. A startling fact there, 93%, again, from the decision maker survey, of organizations have changed their approach to data security posture within the past year. So that's a huge reworking, reallocation, refocusing of resources, both financial and physical and technological, I suppose, in terms of increasing security posture. And here are four of the sort of four data security priorities over the next 24 months. 59% wanting to reduce the opportunity of threats to infiltrate. Not surprising, probably, with that one. But 53% looking to improve the effectiveness of data security posture. And obviously that fits into the DSPM kind of mandate. 44% deep and broad and current use of solutions. But almost sort of shifting towards how you use those particular tools to demonstrate ROI. So 42% interested in basically being able to determine what that return on investment has been over time. So I guess we're moving into a much more kind of focused and maybe even intellectual conversation around specifically how to secure data itself. What are the drivers? Well, I think probably there's 5 that we'll talk about here. The first one, increased threat landscape. I don't think anybody would really sort of dispute that that's perhaps the lead driver. And again, Omdia's research, we have a breaches tracker, which not surprisingly tracks all those sort of declared breaches. And what we've seen over the past 5 years is a growing number of instances, and the numbers for 2024 really sort of perpetuate that argument. Certainly, we will be looking towards a very much larger number for 2024 than we saw in 2023. We've also seen an increasing prevalence of data privacy legislation. Something like 140 or so countries out of about 198 or so now have their own flavor of data privacy legislation. Notably in the US, it's a bit more piecemeal. There's no sort of federal equivalent of GDPR, which we've experienced over here in EMEA for about the last sort of 6 years or so. So we're fairly familiar with it. But various sort of states in the US looking to launch their own sort of flavors. And I think current rate of progress, the prognosis is about half of the US states will have their own form of data privacy legislation by the end of 2026. So it's certainly an area which is driving the need for better data protection, better data security. Thirdly, an ongoing and intensifying need to better protect data. What do I mean by that? Well, really, here I'm talking about the sort of the perpetuation of data across kind of a federated or a spread out network, a dispersed network. We're all working at home, at least some of the time, I guess. There's distributed networks over multiple sites, global businesses, etc. So this is very much more increasing the attack landscape. And really, realistically, we need to do more to protect that data as a whole. It's simply good business practice, right? As the fourth driver, we all know that we need to protect data. We know that when we start our roles, we have an acknowledged kind of restrictions placed upon us with our roles. We only really need access to the data that we need, but it all kind of works in a sort of a physical sense. So it should therefore operate in the same way from a digital point of view. And it makes a lot of sense, really, to try and extrapolate those same values that we have as people into the digital world. So again, it's really operating with that same level of hygiene that we operate with, perhaps in the less digitized world, the paper world, and operate the same metrics, the same parameters in the digital environment. And then fifthly, then of course there's AI, and specifically this is Gen AI. We've had AI for several years now, but really the introduction of Gen AI, perhaps at the beginning of this year, has really sort of ignited the discussion around automation and what it could or may do over time. And this obviously will have a large bearing on the data security world, specifically which elements of data need to be exposed to or loaded into an AI or Gen AI tool. And I think there's quite a lot of organizations that are still scratching their head a little bit in terms of whether or not to adopt AI as a business process, a business productivity tool going forwards. Vendors, I guess, to date have been talking productivity. And only now, really, are we talking about the security implications. So good that debate has finally started. But certainly up until now, it's all been about, data plugged into an AI tool for sort of instant gratification, almost in terms of business productivity. So I think we need to be careful as to where things are going from that point of view. Certainly, there are some elements of AI which would work in a data security sense. Data discovery, yes, definitely. Finding all that data that's been long forgotten about is a very long and laborious process for humans, but an AI tool can do the job quite nicely. So there are definitely some areas to consider, but I think there's also some concerns that we need to address, or at least some considerations that we need to be aware of. In terms of how that kind of pans out in terms of our decision maker survey, so 44% saying that they do perceive that there to be some data security issues. I guess a little bit higher in terms of when you break out the various sort of levels of the organizational hierarchy. C-level and VPs perhaps a little bit more susceptible in terms of actual personal measures and sort of fines or even imprisonment. Perhaps a little bit more sensitive than the managers at 33%. And if we look on that sort of next tier down, organizations who decrease spend 24%, perhaps not, perhaps understandably a little bit less than those organizations have increased their security spend, more tools, more processes, perhaps, so potentially more impact. So it's certainly an area where more thought needs to be given. Specifically, I think we need to really kind of assess the should as well as the could, but certainly I think AI will be with us in some shape or form as we move forward. So interesting times ahead, I think, from an automated perspective. So we've got a new paradigm, I guess, a new security reality. How should businesses adapt? And I think realistically, it's a question of looking towards a much sort of a bigger picture. And I think this is where, DSPM, or at least posture management as a whole, and that sort of need to look, in a much more kind of holistic way, a much bigger picture, really kind of is perhaps the best way forwards. And the next slide really sort of extrapolates, in terms of an approach here. So the bottom of the slide really is where DSPM fits in. And if you kind of interpret DSPM as the kind of, as it were, the unringed boxes, so discover, classify, protect, monitor, analyze, and remediate, is the typical definition of DSPM. Obviously, with the progression of last year, we saw various acquisitions. So there are pluses and minuses to that sort of more traditional, if that's the right way of describing it, that sort of traditional approach to DSPM. Backup and restore potentially what is available via vendors out there. Others will be integrating a control piece via DLP. But I think the one that's missing, that certainly, as an analyst, I would like to see is that delete piece. So it's the acknowledgement that data has a life cycle. It has a construction part when the data is kind of built out. It has a useful phase in terms of how necessary, useful that is to the business. But then it has a timeline or a deadline beyond which that data is now obsolete and needs to be deleted. And I think this is certainly an area which is a little bit of an oddity or an alien concept to some organizations out there. There's not a need to delete data, but I think it makes a lot of sense to do that because of the fact that it not only sort of frees up sort of valuable storage space, it also decreases risk. So, personally speaking, I would like to see delete integrated into a DSPM portfolio going forwards. However, once we've got DSP in place in one shape or form, I think what we've got is a much more robust foundation to build out the remaining layers, the remaining tiers of a cybersecurity posture, ultimately to strive towards that sort of business enablement piece at the top. So if we have data security posture management, defining how our data is protected very much at the sort of the base tier, again, we've got that firm foundation. When we then integrate some threat intelligence, so we know what's out there and we can take appropriate measures because of that particular understanding, we then can build out the various other layers of the cybersecurity posture as a whole. So endpoint security, application security, network security, etc. You've got therefore a sort of a hierarchical or a layered approach, at least, surrounding your data at the core, building out towards the extremities of the network. And I think this is a fundamentally different approach than what we've seen up until maybe the beginning of 2023, maybe 2022. Which again has been very much more sort of concentrated on the extremities of the network. And of course, these days we now have to integrate supply chain partners, customers. There are linkages with our networks, all of which need to be managed. So it's important to sort of think holistically and take care of this sort of additional landscape, as it were, in terms of the way forwards. So what we've then got is hopefully a robustly secured, strongly protected data sets across the business that, because they're protected in the right way, only accessible to the specific users, we can then use that data in the knowledge that it's the right data for those that need to use it for business planning, and really that sort of foundation for growth going forwards. So we get to the point then where actually the true value of DSPM begins to emerge, in the sense that it's more to do with business enablement than it is to do with actually securing the data, which is vitally important, obviously. But what we want to buy a DSPM solution for is that business enablement piece and that improved productivity. But I guess the reality at the moment is that whilst that's the aspiration, a lot of the DSPM deals that Omdia has seen tend to be around sort of the functionality of the data itself. So some statistics here again from the recent survey: 69% wanting complete protection, 61% better overall protection, 55% ability to proactively find vulnerabilities and fix them, regulatory compliance, so obviously important, over half. and then 46% looking to improve manageability. So we've really got to the point where this is to do with sort of feature functionality at the moment and protecting data. And this is reflected really in that sort of the implementation pieces that you can see in the sort of the left-hand square around data classification, data discovery, cloud architecture, data access governance, regulatory compliance. These are the sort of the heres and nows, and I think really reflect organizations doing a lot more to sort of secure their data going forwards. Slight changes, I guess, once those initial pieces are implemented, then we can move on to the next thing around sort of how do you further protect through encryption and introduce sort of compliance monitoring and risk assessment and so on. So lots to think about there, but certainly DSPM is very much the next and very logical step to a more holistic approach and a more focused approach to protecting data. So with that, I will thank you all for listening and hand over to you, Ravi.
All right. Thank you, Adam. Hello, everyone. I'm Ravi Ithal, CTO and co-founder at Normalyze. We are the pioneers in DSPM. We started doing this about 4 years ago, close to 4 years ago, when DSPM was not even called DSPM, right? So we started with like what was really the problem in the industry, and we started from there. We didn't even know this term. And then it turns out that we discovered way more than what we hoped to in terms of how important this problem is, right? So sometimes you go towards the horizon and then the horizon expands, and this happened to us some time ago. And when we started out, it was all about, hey, let's, of course, based on a number of advisors that told us about this problem, find and classify and secure the data wherever it is, right? So it sounds like a very siloed problem, right, in itself, right? So even that is pretty hard, but even that itself is a siloed problem. But if you were to ask why, these were some of the stats that we used to go off with. Obviously, a few years ago, these numbers were smaller, but for example, in 2024, customers are spending about $200 billion on security tools, right? All kinds of security tools. Most of them, 99% of them, are all about infrastructure. Find my vulnerabilities, fix my open ports, and find these vulnerabilities in my hosts and network and identities and so on, right? But yet, what we found is 83% as of 24 organizations have experienced at least one breach. With all of this money spent, they've experienced at least one breach in the last 18 months, right? And it's not cheap when that happens. On average, it costs about 4.35 million. In fact, like in the last couple of weeks, this number came out, a revised number came out. It's close to 4.8 million dollars. It went up by about 10% compared to 23, right? And public cloud breaches being the most expensive, more than hybrid cloud breaches, because there are a lot more attack surface when it comes to public clouds. And if you aggregate all of this, these cyber attacks that result in breaches cost the global economy about $10 trillion as of this year, right? If you just pause for a minute and think about it, there is so much productivity that's there in this world, and all the technologies are adding more and more productivity. But just because data is not properly secured, we lose so much of it, right? So forget about like your job and your industry and your company for a second. But if you just step back and then look at all these humans are spending so much energy trying to create so much value, but so much of it is lost because of bad security practices. That's a worthy goal to pursue, regardless of any current trends, right? You must agree to that. And if you think about why that's happening, what is new now? Like, this has been, systems have been there for a long time. Like, what is new now, right? So you will notice that there are a bunch of trends that are creating data proliferation. Used to be SaaS, then it used to be public cloud, then microservices, then data lakes, and now it's Gen AI, right? So Gen AI, obviously, it's on top of everyone's mind. So you will immediately identify with that problem. But what happens is an average organization has about 400 data sources across SaaS, PaaS, cloud, and on-prem environment. These are not just applications that somebody is using. These are data sources where your company's data, valuable data, customer data, employee data, and your intellectual property is being stored at a variety of places. And demand for accessing this data is increasing. Like data lakes, for example, things like Snowflake and Databricks are plenty, right? Like, you're seeing huge adoption of that. The reason is it's so easy to put all your data in one place, create a hierarchy of roles, and give access to various analysts. And now comes Gen AI. You connect your Snowflake to Gen AI, or your unstructured data source to AI, and so on. And both of those are major trends. As you can see, 90% plus of IT professionals expect to have some sort of Gen AI in their production at the end of this year. And data lakes are expected to continue to grow with a market of about 17 billion. These are huge numbers. If you really look at it, that is how much people are spending on the infrastructure to store the data. But if you calculate the value of the data stored on $17.6 billion worth of infrastructure, it goes into trillions, right? That is where all the risk comes in. And when data is getting created and proliferated automatically, it's super easy for data and security teams to have blind spots, and those blind spots to grow as well. And what happens in that case is, if you don't have full visibility, you end up being reactive. You cannot scale in terms of, like, how you react to those. So you have to be proactive about it. That's kind of really the crux of the problem, right? So given that, why can't existing tools solve this problem? Why do we need something called a DSPM? Why one more category of products? It comes down to those silos, right? All these products, the existing products, were all built when data was not proliferating this hard. So you would go and deploy a DLP solution, which is usually blocking unauthorized data transfers, reactive, just in time when somebody tries to get some data out, try to find it, and then protect it. That probably accounts for about 1 to 2% of all the data that's in your environment. What about all the 99% that is already sitting at rest in your environment? Then some people say, hey, I've got a CSPM, that should be good enough. The fact of the matter is, it is very infrastructure centric. It might detect a few data stores, but it doesn't really tell you, out of the 10,000 data stores that you have, which ones are more valuable, which ones are less valuable. So you end up with a million findings that you had to go and fix, with the promise that when you fix all of them, your data is secure. But your data is probably in 100 of those 10,000 data stores, and like you're essentially like spending 100 times the effort that you have to in order to secure that data, right? So it's very inefficient. Like, it protects your infrastructure, not necessarily what you really want to protect, which is your data. Then there are other siloed approaches like CASB. Like, my previous company, we went and built, initially in the early years, we built what is known as CASB for SaaS. It kind of focuses on SaaS, but not necessarily all the other places where data is, especially in public cloud and data lakes and on-prem and so on, right? Then there is the identity-centric approach that people take. Hey, as long as I can control who has access to what, I've got everything secure. Well, good luck with that, because if you don't know what somebody's business function is and what they're trying to access, and you have 100 access requests coming in every day, there is no way humanly you can grant those and then maintain them as well over time. So these are all. So if you really look at the existing products, they're all addressing this in silos. That's why we invented DSPM. And if you go really with this approach, I mean, it's obviously, you won't be able to like find. I mean, as a security professional, I mean, it's an uphill battle to say, I'm going to go and I'm going to implement this giant DSPM that is gonna like solve all my problems. It's going to be an uphill battle with your superiors. So um, typically, like what we see, our users and our customers come to us with specific use cases that they can use the DSPM to address. That is top of mind for the management and the business. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to enable the business. You don't get any points or budget for playing around with cool technology. So these are some of the use cases that we usually see. Top of mind is Gen AI, obviously. So a lot, like probably about 50% of the conversations that we have is like, what are you doing with Gen AI, right? How do I control with control what type of data my models are using, ingesting? How do I know the people who are using the LLM interfaces actually should have access to the data that it's ingesting? Which goes back to simplifying data access governance. We just have the interface as the LLM, but like this already existed. There's a whole bunch of data lying around, very hard to label them. How do you actually automate that labeling so that you can enforce access control? Really, a lot of business enablement activities also center around compliance. Your CEO comes to you and then says to the CISO and then says, "Hey, we need to do business in this new geography, and that's going to give us 10% increase in our addressable market. Go figure out everything that we need to do." Or maybe, even worse, they actually start doing it, and then you figure out like, oh, you know what, we need to comply to these 4 new regulations. And then, lots of I've personally talked to many CISOs who are not proactive about achieving this compliance, and then they end up reacting, thereby costing the company lots and legal fees and regulatory fines and so on. So that's another reason why you want to know what type of data you have where, because most of these regulations require you to handle the data, not necessarily anything about the infrastructure. The last but not the least is how do you reduce the risk to your data, obviously, and the attack surface in general, uh, in a more efficient way. Earlier, I talked about how all the 3,000 vendors that are out there provide you with tons and tons of alerts and risks that say, hey, if you fix this particular piece of infrastructure is secure, or this identity is secure, and so on. But there are millions of these. If you really want to measurably reduce your data attack surface, which is the real risk that you're running, you need to correlate all of those findings with what is at stake, which is data, right? As a side effect, you will also understand that you will also see that there are many copies of data that should not be there. People take a huge data store, they make a copy of it, use it for their development activities or some analysis, and then they forget about it. Especially in the cloud, there's no server that's actually making a whirring sound behind your back. So once it's outside of your console, out of your laptop screen, it's gone. People forget about it. So we many times hear that like the data consumption costs have gone up. Can you actually help us reduce that as well? Right. So these are the typical use cases that people come to us with that have direct business significance, but they find it hard to do because there is tons and tons of challenges with just doing it with existing technologies. Like I mentioned, there's tons of data that is forgotten, so they don't even know. You need to go and discover all of that first. Like there is abandoned data that you have to go and discover that. There is data that they think is PII or not PII, or maybe not intellectual property, but happens to be the other way around. So it's misclassified. How do you go and efficiently reclassify to get more accurate view of all of that? There is overprivileged accesses. You cannot assume that everybody who has access to the data needs access. In fact, we find that 98% of users who have access to data don't even need it. They haven't used it in the last 18 to 24 months. How do you actually discover those overprivileged access and reduce it? So these are some of the challenges that exist. These are the gaps that need to be filled with new technology. That's what we do, right? So we connect to your existing environment. There's nothing to deploy. Those are old school technologies. You have to go download the software, install it in a bunch of servers or VMs, scale it out, upgrade it, maintain it, all for what? We are in 2024, cloud native technologies, right? So we connect to your cloud environments. We keep the data where the data is supposed to be, in the regions, in the accounts where it should belong, and we help you answer these questions. First and foremost, where is the valuable and sensitive data? If you had 10,000 data stores, like we routinely see in many customers, which ones should you focus on first? If here's a data store that contains tons of PII and intellectual property, that might be worth $100 million versus another set of cached images, even though the volume is higher, might be $10 worth. Who cares, right? So we help you actually attach a dollar value to each of these data stores so that you can prioritize what data stores to spend your time on so that you get more ROI. Then once you identify that, next question is who should have access to this? Who has access? Who is accessing it? And who does not need access anymore? So like I mentioned earlier, a large percentage of users don't even need access to the data. So you're essentially sometimes running and managing 50 times the attack surface than what you should be. So we help you reduce that by analyzing who has access, who is accessing, and so on. Then the fourth one is, of the remaining accesses, what is the risk? What is the exposure? What are the misconfigurations or vulnerabilities that are there among your users who does not have MFA or compromised credentials, or maybe you have vulnerabilities in your servers that are exposed to the outside world. How do you analyze all of that risk? How do you determine the likelihood of exposure for any given data store, and how do you quantify that? That's the fourth one. And last but not the least, like I said, continuously and in an automated fashion, how do you figure out whether you're complying to various regulations? And when you connect and when you do this, it's very quick. By the way, we get that done over Zoom call in many cases. Within about 2 weeks, you will get a dashboard like this, very actionable. This is not months. In fact, it finishes in hours, but like we usually take our time to basically present you with this findings. This is just a high-level overview, and then there'll be a detailed dashboard that you'll be able to access and drill down into each of these. How much data we found, what is the value at risk, and what is the value at high risk. As you can see, we attach a monetary value so that you can really say, hey, I have $170 million worth of sensitive data that is at risk. I mean, that's essentially what the business is going to pay if in one way or another, if there is a breach. So in order to fix those breaches, like what are the things that I need to fix, that gives me the highest ROI. So unique and high impact risks, as you can see, there are 11 risks. If you do that, it attaches itself to what is the value of the data that is being protected, and what are the highest impact risks to fix, right? So that's essentially what you're going to get. So I'm going to pass it back to Adam, who's going to talk about some recommendations for enterprises.
Yeah, thanks, Ravi. Interesting stuff. So yeah, this slide really kind of sums up what we've been talking about in a couple of bullets in many ways. I think the key thing really is to try and get an assessment in terms of what data that you've got present on your network as a whole. It's very difficult actually in practice to do this when you consider that there's on-prem data, there's cloud-based data, there's data present in SaaS applications and so on. But it's really got to be a barrier that is assaulted and sort of transversed. it's also important to know that not all data is of equal importance. So, previous strategies in terms of throwing a net over the organization as a whole in an attempt to sort of protect everything in one sort of size fits all type of an approach really isn't the way forward. So once you've got an understanding, I think in terms of the volume of data, then trying to figure out where the sensitive elements of it are, mindful of course that there are categories of data, and PII is typically one, but there are also classifications or sensitivities of data. So some PII is more important than others, for example. So that's, I guess, the first kind of takeaway. Then, DSPM sounds like it's the right way forward, but it needs to be considered on its merits. And there are a whole host of them in many ways. But I think the big thing really is, large vendors, small vendors may offer slightly different kind of portfolios. So make sure that the DSPM solution you go for really sort of fits your needs. As we are seeing sort of larger vendors kind of moving into this space, DSPM has become integrated into much wider portfolios as well. So that's also worth considering. But certainly, there's a good proposition from many of the vendors out there. But just assess whether it's a good fit for your organization. Ravi, any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So this is this approach of platform versus single vendor keeps coming up a lot. My opinion on this is usually you have to take a look at security in general. They're not developed as features as part of a large platform. So being a pure play data security vendor, obviously I'm biased, but if you take a look at an existing platform, like their motivation for the platform, for the business, is to provide a checkbox that basically serves one of the business needs for you, and then be done with it, right? So, but especially in security, what happens is you take an area, you have to keep going, keep making a lot of progress, stay ahead of the attackers, and so on. That cannot happen as part of a platform. You need to be much more nimble, much more agile to actually be able to pull that off. And pure play information protection, data security vendor is what I would recommend everybody. So I guess the next slide is mine. Just to sum it up, would be happy to engage with you. Here is my contact information. You can reach out to me. I'll be happy to engage with you. So, some of us will engage with you. You can get this report called Data Risk Assessment for your organization. Detect all the sensitive data, vulnerabilities, potential entry points in your cloud environment, provide insights into what is the impact and also the likelihood, and we'll tailor a prioritized path for effective remediation for most of these things, right? So easiest way is to get in touch with me, Ravi at Normalyze.ai. We'll be looking forward to your communication. So that's it. Thank you. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out, and we'll be in touch with you again.